maximize their entitlements. Myself personally, I'm an engineering grad from the University of Manitoba. I worked in industry for several years and had some experience starting my own business before I joined the Canada Revenue Agency. And I worked in the SR&ED program. I actually spent 6 years in the SR&ED program as a research and technology advisor. So I was making decisions on Canada Revenue's behalf and determinations with respect to SR&ED claims. So yeah, what I'd like to do today is walk everyone through the program, say this is what it's all about, and to give you a bit of insight about whether maybe you may potentially be eligible. And yeah, and then I'm open for any questions or otherwise. So yeah, I'll kick it off, but with what I want to talk about today, which is, what's SR&ED all about? A lot of you have probably heard of SR&ED, but how it applies to companies can be pretty challenging. So, what it's about, what kind of companies apply for it, how do we determine if we're eligible, and then, why would you want to apply? I think everybody understands that there's some financial benefit to it, but people don't really understand how it would apply to their company if their company were eligible. Yeah, so off to start, SR&ED, I mean, it's been around for a long time, since 1986. It means scientific research and experimental development. Experimental development being the key word there. Most companies aren't doing scientific research, but a lot of companies are doing what Canada Revenue Agency considers experimental development. And its purpose is to incentivize R&D within Canada of all sizes and all sectors. So if you're doing R&D in Canada, it wants to provide you incentive. So perhaps in a future year, you may adjust your business decisions to encourage you to invest in R&D if you thought that you may be eligible for funding. The funding with SR&ED, it's a tax credit, so it can either reduce your income tax payable, or if you don't have any tax payable, it's a cash refund for small and medium enterprises. If you're an incredibly large company, it's non-refundable, the tax refund. But it's big. Like SR&ED is far bigger than IRAP, far bigger than Western Vacation, NSERC or otherwise. Roughly speaking, they release their stats every few years, but over $3 billion in tax incentives a year, over 20,000 claimants. Numbers have been as high as 25,000 before. So what kind of companies are eligible? Well, a CCPC, I think most people here are probably CCPCs. Are you a corporation? Canadian controlled private corporation, that's who the largest number of applicants are for it. If you're a non-CCPC, foreign or publicly owned corporation, you can also file. It's not quite as lucrative. Any size, like when I worked for the CRA, I met with people in fancy boardrooms with with a dozen people around the table, but I also met in people's basements, people who had small businesses, people who were writing software, who were developing video games from home. You see all sorts of corporations, which is one great thing about SR&ED. It's quite accessible. And if you're a sole proprietor, there are some scenarios where there may be some work or some contract work that you had done that may be eligible. So what kind of work are they looking for? So they want to incentivize R&D within Canada. That's a really tough thing to measure because different companies, they have different understandings of what R&D would be. A very sophisticated company, sets a fairly high bar for R&D. If you were a large manufacturing company and you hired your first software developer, your understanding of R&D in that area might not be where everyone else is. So they can't really take your word at what's R&D. They have a test of 5 questions. I won't go into too much detail with them, but the gist of it being is the first question is, was there a scientific or technological uncertainty? Is there a problem that with the base level knowledge that you had within your company and it was broadly available in the public domain, was there still a problem you didn't know how to solve? That's the first question. So you've got a problem, you're not sure how to solve it or the best process to solve it. And it's a technology, it's either scientific or it's in the realm of technology. It's not a business problem, right? It's not, I didn't know how to reach these new customers. It's got to be with your technology. The second question, did the effort involve formulating hypotheses specifically aimed at reducing or eliminating that uncertainty? Well, now it sounds, once we start adding hypothesis to it and otherwise, it starts to sound a lot like, you know, sort of grade 12 chemistry class. They do speak the language of businesses, despite what it is here. They really want to know what your idea was. You had a problem, you had a challenge, you had a problem, you had a challenge. What was your idea to solve it? And can you articulate what your idea was to solve it? The third question is, was the overall approach adopted consistent with a systematic investigation or search? I'll leave it at that for that one. How did you go about testing whether your idea was valid or not? What was your process to test that? The fourth question is probably the hardest one for companies to achieve, and that's, was the overall approach undertaken for the purpose of achieving a scientific or technological advancement? Personally, for myself, if we just talk about this part, it's sort of the key to SR&ED is, what was your technological advancement? What new knowledge did your company generate in overcoming your problem? That's sort of the key one right there. I'll touch on it a little bit more, but if you think of a software company, you know, and you had a performance-related problem, you had uncertainties related to resolving that performance-related problem, and you successfully overcame it, or unsuccessfully overcame it too, like, or you had problems. What was the new knowledge you generated within that process? And the final question is, was a record of the hypothesis tested and the results kept as the work progressed? So that's really, show us your work. You know, prove that you did it. You can't say you built a rocket ship and the CRA comes out and there's no evidence of a rocket ship there. That's how you get in a lot of trouble, but they do require evidence of the work that you've performed. So if you look at this, effectively, they want to see some signs of the scientific method, but a lot of companies do this. It's not quite as pretty as it's sort of written up. It's not as obvious that you are following this method, but once you actually think about it, you did have a problem. You know, you did have ideas about how you were going to resolve it, and you know, you did achieve a technological advancement. So it's really a matter of taking these questions, looking at your specific business and saying, okay, does this potentially apply to you? The CRA does take business context into account. So that means the test for a small company, one-person operation, won't be the same as it would be for a major pharmaceutical company. If you were a major pharmaceutical company, their requirements for the records kept are incredibly high. If you're a one-person operation, perhaps your notes and your work tickets and your Trello and your Git commits, that might be sufficient. So, okay, why would you want to apply for SR&ED? Well, it's quite generous. That's the big thing. I mentioned at the start, over $3 billion. So potentially, of a salary of someone who's working on the work that resolves these 5 questions is 61% of the salaries could potentially be refundable. Contractors that you spend, if there's a contractor involved in the project, could be roughly 29% refundable. And materials which you consumed or transformed in the process, up to 38% refundable. If you're a non-CCPC, I won't go too much into that. It's a little bit less generous. That basically means if you're a publicly traded company, or if you're not based in Canada, you're not a Canadian company, but you have a Canadian office, you're doing work in Canada. One important thing is you have to pay yourself. Salaries are eligible for SR&ED, dividends are not. If you're a technical contributor, if you're doing some of the work yourself, you need a salary to pay yourself if you expect to receive some SR&ED for that. You can't just pay yourself a dividend. As well with employees too, you need to pay your employees, whether it be salaries or contractors. If you were a startup and you were just giving someone equity, there's no method to recover that as far as SR&ED goes. So just a quick case study of what kind of money you'd be looking at. This is just a software development company based in Manitoba. So they're working on a new web mobile application, and there was some eligibility within it. There was some eligibility with respect to the new architecture that they were building. Their technical team, they had 2 software developers at about $70,000 a year. A system administrator, someone doing some DevOps, they were at $60,000 a year, and a designer who was working on the interface of the system and otherwise about $50,000 a year. So about 80% software development time was eligible in this case. So what we're sort of saying is of the software developers' time over the course of the year, 80% of it was working on SR&ED. 25% of the system administrator's time was directly in support of the SR&ED. So they were doing work that was essential for the SR&ED, and they were involved in it for a quarter of their time. None of the designer's time was eligible. Generally speaking, look and feel, that work's not going to fall into an eligibility category. So if we look at this smallish team, right? If you sort of think in your head of like, okay, well, you know, what kind of refund would they get in this situation? I'll show you right here. It's pretty nice. So their eligible salaries are $120,000 because the 2 software developers at 80%, the system administrator at 15%. The CRA covers some of your overhead by a proxy rate. They are a CCPC, so they have a 35% rate at which they receive SR&ED. And there's also a bit of a Manitoba R&D tax credit that's applied through the SR&ED program. The end result of this is $88,000 in tax credits. So of that $88,000, over $73,000 are refundable. So that really means a check. So in that situation, they get $73,000 back. A portion of it was non-refundable in that case, so they would have to wait to earn money to cancel taxes on that. So it really, you can really see how this can be quite lucrative for companies, and it can really change the math. It can really change the math for them about whether they're going to invest in software development or invest in, you know, any area of science or technology. I use software a lot because a lot of people who are working at Launch use software. I'm from a software development background. It could be agriculture, you know, ag science. It could be biosystems. It could be mechanical engineering. There's a lot of different areas. There's a lot of different areas that apply to SR&ED. The key areas, though, it's got to be, it's science and technology related. Yeah, so in this scenario, this company, their expectation is they're going to keep working on R&D. Their team's going to slightly grow. So that means in the future that 73K may end up being closer to 90K. And, you know, if they can keep doing SR&ED, that becomes like an annuity for them as long as they're doing eligible work. So each year they can apply for SR&ED. You know, one thing that's very important is you've done your work, you've worked on your application, you've worked on whatever it is you're working on. Well, there needs to be some form of documentation. If the CRA wants to come look at what you've done, they need some evidence that the work was performed and that the work was performed within the tax year that you're claiming. SR&ED occurs across the tax year, just like the rest of your business. So any work, any documentation, it must be contemporaneous. That's a word I'd never really heard until I worked for the CRA. Generated, dated when the work was performed. Technical challenges, they should be identified. Activities to resolve these challenges should be noted. So there should be some documentation somewhere. It could be an email. It doesn't need to be pretty documentation. That's one thing that's very important. It could be an email. It could be from Git. It could be meeting notes, tickets, sometimes a picture of a of a system you've drawn out on a whiteboard, that can be evidence as well. Slack messages, those things are all potential forms of documentation. As well, some form of time tracking is also required. Now, it doesn't need to be incredibly detailed, but ultimately you need some method to say, I feel that Jason is entitled to 27% of his time for SR&ED. Well, how did we come up with 27%? There needs to be some method to identify that. Often with companies, you either have a form of loose time tracking internally, or you can sometimes put it together based on their Git commits, their emails, their meeting notes, or otherwise, and really sort of drill down to what percentage of their time was working on that problem. So when you do file for SR&ED, there is the possibility that you'll be reviewed for SR&ED. You file with them, and there will be situations. Most situations, they'll like to come out to see you under some circumstance to say, are you eligible? Is this? It's a lot of money we just talked about, right? We just talked about a small company that was going to receive, close to $100,000 in tax credits. They want to verify this money is going to the right place, but they're not income tax audits. So if you do file for SR&ED, it's not bringing your whole tax life into the conversation. It's SR&ED only. So a CRA review, it can either be a coordinated review. That's the technical and financial reviewers, they will determine the eligibility, the extent of your claim. So we've made a filing for SR&ED. The CRA is going to want to come out and meet with us, determine if the work is eligible. And if it is, did you claim it at the right extent? The right amount of work did you claim as being eligible? As well, they often have a first-time claim advisory service, okay, where a first-time claimant, we come out, they would come out and meet with you as a taxpayer, find out a lot of information about your business. And in those cases, likely, if they've been impressed with your claim, they won't go into a full audit, full review, but you will receive your tax credits. So the CRA reviews, it's not just accountants who are coming out to see you. They're conducted by CRA employees, research and technology advisors. That's what my former role was there, and financial reviewers. So the research and technology advisor who comes out to find about the work you've claimed, they're going to have education and professional experience in your area. So they're going to come out, if you're doing a biosystems claim, there's going to be someone who has some background from there. Full of people, I think right now they have 4 research and technology advisors in Winnipeg, and they have a few across the prairies. They have a handful in the bigger cities across the prairies. One of those people come out to review the file. This is really important. It's sort of, you've sort of got the loose overview of this now, and you're saying, okay, well, if I wanted to claim, when can I do it? There is a hard deadline on SR&ED. It has to be within 18 months after a tax year ends. So that is pretty generous in the sense, if your tax year ended, if your tax year ends on 12/31 on December 31st, that means you can still file for your 2019 tax year, the tax year that ended that one. You can still file for that one till June of 2021. So there is quite a bit of time with that one. Currently, if someone's hasn't filed for their 2018 tax year, they can still file. Like, that deadline isn't until the end of June. But I do recommend filing within the first 6 months. It's a current claim. If you're outside of the first 6 months of your tax year end, they have to. It's an amended claim. What that really means is you've already filed your taxes. Now you have to amend it and say, hey, wait, I also wanted SR&ED. These are hard deadlines, like the 18-month deadline, despite the COVID-19, everything that's happening. They've talked about there's filing deferments. They've talked about with your taxes right now. It does not apply to SR&ED. So there's no And I've never, in my time there, I've never heard of anyone who's missed an 18-month deadline, and the CRA allowed you to file anyways. Like when it's gone, it's gone. If you do file, normally you have a decision within 2 to 6 months. Sometimes it can be quicker, sometimes it can be slower. So far, it's been slower lately, just with everything that's going on. Like they're getting slammed the CRA, and they're moving people to various departments to handle payments or whatever else. But yeah, there's you know, it is slower, but effectively it's worth it. I mean, the way to think about it with companies is, you know, if you're really in a tough situation and it was going to be approved, you can always claim financial duress, and they may fast track it a bit for you, presuming your work has already been approved as being SR&ED. So, you know, I went through it pretty quick, just to make sure I sort of touched on that, and so we don't run out of time right here. Yeah. So as I said, what I do is I help companies identify SR&ED. I've got experience on both sides of the SR&ED table, so I help companies identify it and then maximize SR&ED tax credits. Now, does anybody have any questions about SR&ED? Anything I can help with while I'm here? And feel free to email me or call me. No problem if you don't have anything right now.
Steve, super informative presentation. Thanks so much. I'll ask the first question. You spoke a little bit about software development, and we've had a sort of a sidebar conversation related to one of our software projects. I also have a product question. What are sort of the thresholds related to product development when it comes to, I guess, the experimental side? Is there any sort of claims that it needs to meet?
Well, the way to think about a product is what's the technology beneath the product? And then when we look at what the technology was to achieve that product, it's about saying, okay, how can we look at that product or look at the work that was done to achieve that product and see if we think it may fit with the 5 questions for SR&ED. So I think in someone like your situation, Jason, yeah. Who's, you know, you come at things very much from a business idea angle or otherwise. So you're very much thinking on the output side of it. So I think one thing that's really important for someone like yourself, who's coming at it from the business angle, is to say, okay, well, let's just take a look at what we had to do to achieve this business output, because it's very easy to be involved at the level that you really work on with it. What are the features? What are the selling points? CRA is not so much interested with the features and selling points, but what did you have to do underneath that to achieve those features and selling points? So, you know, taking a look at that work, what were the obstacles that you had to overcome to achieve those features, to achieve those selling points? Those are the thresholds that we're really going to talk about and really look at there. We got to lift the hood, and because those features and those selling points, those impose constraints for your developers that made their lives harder. Perhaps in the process of you making their lives harder, they had to perform some SR&ED.
Right. Okay.
So I have a question. It sounds like this is a process that is done after the fact, when you already went through the research and the development, and you apply for the credits based on past work.
That's correct.
Do you also help setting up a new project or a new development in order to be better prepared for applying for a credit in the future?
Yes, that is very important. That is something I really like to do, often with people, depending if someone's for the first time in the program. Normally, what I like to do is twofold. One, it's sort of, let's take a look if there's work you have done and that we're on the clock to get it in before your filing deadline happens, to see if we can file for work you've already achieved. There's that part of it. And then there's the next part, which is really taking a look at the work you've done, saying, okay, well, is there some small changes we can make that will really make this eligible, or that can really make this person's time eligible for SR&ED? Is there some documentation that can strengthen our case that we can generate? And often those things don't take a lot of time, but definitely like to work with people proactively, so we're not just thinking about what you did last year. It's what you're working on this year, because you're going to be filing for that ideally within the next, as your tax year comes to an end. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Hernan, Cheryl, do you have any questions at all, or
Mahmoud, I know you do a lot of software related stuff. Does anything apply for you here?
Okay. I just got arrived here to launch Exchange. Thank you very much for the content. It's really helpful. I think it's very actually informative and enlightening to know the details. I have heard about SR&ED a long time ago, and while you were talking today, it made me think that some of what we do may hopefully be eligible. But that's my question, I guess. We are recently working on an application to integrate some of two of our software that we use internally for the business, and we are working with a developer to integrate both of those software, and this is to serve our business processes, our internal business processes. Does something like that qualify? Is that
there are. I mean, there definitely are situations where integration work can qualify.
Okay.
These things aren't necessarily easy, and it really depends on what you're integrating, right? You're integrating your email to take emails from Excel spreadsheet. You're not going to look at SR&ED. You're looking at two complicated pieces of software that you're trying to perform. You've got some constraints, and you're looking at achieving some level of integration. There may be work in there. There may be some uncertainty of what you're trying to overcome to get that done. So I think one thing that's important is to sort of really take a hard look at the obstacles you're getting. I think one thing with technical people is, especially sometimes you can have a developer who says, like, well, we just do this, we just do this, we just do this. Their head's pretty deep in what they're working and what they've come to know and understand. So they can take it for granted, their understanding of the technology, when really there may be SR&ED, but they've become so involved in the project and they have such a deep understanding that they've sold themselves short when it really is an eligible project. So I think that's something definitely to consider. I've definitely seen a lot of eligible projects that really worked on integrating, multiple pieces of software together.
Makes sense. Thanks. It's certainly more than an email integration with an Excel.
Yeah, I know, and I just said that to give a really easy, not doing it,
I get it for sure. No, I'm sure I'll reach out to learn more. But yeah, thank you.
Actually, thank you for the question, Mahmoud.
You're welcome.
Cheryl, did you have any comments?
I do have a question. I do have a question, Steve. I have a background with software development, and currently my business is a lot of human interaction. And the problem with that is that the training is very difficult, and we're having to hire people with the ability to do what we do. My intention is to create a software that will lessen the training and be kind of all of our brains put into one. And that is specifically for my business.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go to continue. Sorry.
Would something that is solely, this is just what we would use within our business, that would really then enable us to be able to hire more people based on their personalities as opposed to their abilities. So I'm looking at developing software to be able to close that gap.
Yeah, so definitely the fact that it's just for your business is just fine. That has it's one interesting thing with SR&ED versus IRAP is IRAP's all about, well, what's the outcome going to be of this? Like, how is this project going to result in net improvement for Canada? SR&ED is strictly about the technology. So the fact that you're using it internally, Cheryl, for your business, that's no problem at all. You don't need to commercialize it. You don't need to sell the product. It doesn't need to be software as a service. It doesn't need to be shrink wrap. It can be an internal business process that you're solving. It's all comes down to the technology for SR&ED. So if the technology that you're working on for your business meets the test, then that's sufficient, regardless of what, even if it's unsuccessful, your product. From a market perspective, it doesn't matter. That's not part of the test. The test is strictly about the content of your technical work.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Great. Well, with that, unless there's any follow-along questions, I think we'll thank Steve for his time, and thank you all for taking time out of your morning to join us here today. And remind you that I will circulate this presentation as soon as we're done here, and also welcome you to join us again on Thursday for Clint Unruh's presentation related to sales. Any final questions or comments before we sign off?
I just want to say thanks, Jason. Thanks for setting this up. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, fire me an email, give me a call, and hopefully I see everyone soon under one circumstance or another. But yeah, don't hesitate to give me just give me a call or give me a question if you want to have any more specific specific details of the work that you are doing or looking at doing. But thanks so much, Jason.
Thank you,
Great.
Jason, Stephen.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you very much.